David, you guys have announced a number of roster decisions today, so I'm just curious if you could kind of take us into the process, maybe some of those conversations you had this week and with those players, and just kind of maybe the thought process behind the roster that you have going forward into next year.
Yeah, so, not a super fun time of the year for any team when you're needing to tell a group of great people, first and foremost, that they don't have a future with the club is not easy. I think the level of professionalism and everything that showed by our players was commendable during the meetings yesterday. Ultimately, as I look ahead to 2026, one of the key things we need to do in order to improve the team is to create space to be able to bring new players in. It's one of the hardest things to do in MLS. When you've got contracts that are guaranteed, it's very, very difficult to then move some of those on. So we were entering an off-season where we knew we had the potential to create flexibility, and given, in my opinion, the need to improve the roster overall, that we felt like it was the right decision to only exercise 4 of those options and bring back 4 of those players. Obviously still in discussions with 2 more. To ultimately create space so that now that we can focus on the next task, which is filling those slots and filling the resources that we freed up to be able to bring in new players into this team in 2026 to improve the results on the field.
Looking at it numbers-wise, I mean, 18 open roster spots is a lot to fill. I assume maybe not try and have all of those filled necessarily by the time the league kicks off next year, but majority of them. What's the process like for filling those spots then? Because I know you're handicapped with international slots and all that kind of stuff. How do you take into account? What do you see being the way that you bring in a lot of players, whether they're domestic, foreign? How does that shake out?
So I think it'll be a mix of both. Right now we have 4 international slots available based on the roster we have today. Potential maybe to get some green cards that could open up additional international roster slots. The simple answer is we're going to explore every possible avenue, waivers, free agency, super draft, international markets to fill all of these roster slots. We know we can't do everything on the international market and we can't do everything on the domestic market. So myself, the staff here, we're going to have to work really hard to identify the players. That process has already started. I've only been here a couple of weeks, but the work had begun before I arrived, and now it's for me to pick that up and take that to hopefully conclusion. We would like as many players as we possibly can for the first day of preseason. That's what any coach that we have here will demand. We're probably not going to have a completely full roster come January 10th for first day of medicals, but the goal is to have as many of those players as possible in the building so we can start to work with what will be a very new group entering 2026.
And then you guys kind of have about 4 open of the premium roster spots, I guess, between the DPs or the U22. How do you guys are in a position where you can go either way with the 2 and 4 or 3 and 3. How do you evaluate what that looks like? Which model do you think is the better one to use? And do you anticipate having those slots filled before the start of the season? I know this team this year went with 2 and 2 the entirety of the year and did not use the full flexibility of those opportunities in those premium roster spots.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we've got 4. I would also say, we've got quite a lot of salary cap space as well, which can be a premium player that we can bring into the team. But in terms of discretionary investment, we've got 4 open slots to use. How I'm envisioning that right now, we've got 2 DPs with Dayan and Manu on the team. I think the team needs more quality and more depth throughout the entire roster, which lends itself, in my view, to being in the 2DP model, where you can use the additional allocation money to build depth through the 14 non-discretionary roster slots on the salary cap. But we haven't made that firm decision yet. I think we want to stay open and nimble. If we find the right designated player to add, then we will take that opportunity to ownership to get their support. But right now, as I'm looking at the team and the amount of players that we need to bring in, I do think that depth is going to be really, really important, and so probably trending right now towards being in the 2DP model for at least the start of the season, and then we can always, if we only sign 3 U22 players, which we haven't decided yet, but if we only sign 3, then you could always pivot away in the summer in case that is what we want to do. The way I look at that is I think we're trying to assess, if you're in the 3DP model, I would say, essentially you're trading what should be very, very high quality player for an additional U22 player and $2 million extra in allocation money. And so that judgment call is one that you want to make sort of every transfer window if you can, or certainly every season based on where your team is. And there'll be always moments where we might be one really important player away from, having the success that we want, in which case maybe you move to the 3DP model. But right now we're looking at the 2DP model. I believe we'll have support to fill the discretionary roster slots. We haven't gone through and had done all the exercise with ownership on that, but they've been unbelievably supportive of me, and that was part of the conversation of being and coming here. They want to succeed, and I believe if we want to have a most success we possibly can, we're going to need to try and use those discretionary slots in the most effective way we can. So we're certainly looking to bring to fill in those U22 slots that we have available right now. Probably only 3 would be my guess, so that we do have the flexibility to pivot if we wanted to. And the goal for those will be to be here as soon as they can, so they can impact from the very beginning of the season.
And David, you've only been here a couple of weeks now, and obviously a lot of decisions were made really fast after the season ended. How much of that was part of your interview process too, in prepping and saying kind of where you see the roster being after the season's over?
Yeah, so it was certainly a discussion, but I was also hesitant to, when you're watching from a distance, you don't get to know as much as you would like to be able to make these decisions. So to be honest, it was one of the first conversations that I started having with Kerry, with Mike, with the wider staff here, all of the coaching staff involved, to really assess and get their feedback on the roster. They've been working with them the entire year, and the one thing I would say is based on my review of the roster from a distance and what I found when I came here, there was pretty good alignment between us, in terms of the decisions that we wanted to make. So of course there's always 1 or 2 or 3 that maybe fall into a grey area where you have a difference of opinion. But to be honest, I would say most of the decisions were quite clear in order to free up the space to be able to go and improve the roster for 26.
And then you mentioned Kerry and Mike, and obviously you have a lot of staff to hire, analytics, coaching, all this. Where are you guys at on making a coaching hire and building out the rest of your staff?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my opening press conference, we're still head coach hire is going to take priority. We've started that process. We started some outreach to candidates. I did want to get through the player decisions first, so we could have that clarity. It's important the players got to hear from me about what their future would be. But now we move on to filling the holes in the staff, and there are, I think, as we look at analytics and scouting, I would say it's probably 2 departments that I would say are a longer term build over the next 14 months or so, because ultimately I want to be as solely focused as I can on the decisions that are going to impact January, February and March, which is the coaching staff, the staff that are directly supporting the players when they return for preseason, and then the players that we need to bring in. So that's going to be the main focus, and the work that will really start with the head coach, and then that will also allow to flow to the other decisions that we need to make.
How much does that, if at all, make the process of acquiring players and scouting players more difficult if you don't have a fully built analytics and scouting department when you're trying to bring these players in this short term right now?
It's more complicated for sure. However, I think there's ways, and we've already started to bring in some consultant help to identify some areas where we can really get some help quickly. That is not the time-consuming process of hiring people full time. So we started that process already. Of course, it would make it slightly easier if you had that right now, but I think we've got a great group of staff that have been working really, really hard behind the scenes to try and prep for what we knew would be a big transfer window. No matter who was coming into my chair, we knew there was going to be a lot of change, and so that work has already started. But I think as we build it, we do have tools. There are data that you can use that you don't need people. I'm experienced in using that data as well myself, so I can add that to the process as well.
You obviously have a lot of work to do in this transfer window, so you can have a roster to play and everything. But we've talked before about the difference between the winter transfer window and the summer transfer window. Excuse me. And this one is a unique one because it's after a local World Cup. And I'm kind of curious, just your thoughts on post-World Cup transfer windows. Sometimes we see players really increase their value and all of that, but they're being scouted for their country instead of their club and how they fit. Do you feel like you want to keep some stuff in, like some flexibility so you can make moves at that time? And just kind of how do you look at the summer transfer window right after a World Cup in general?
Yeah, so in general, I prefer, if we can, to try to use our resources from the very beginning of the season. if we wait to use our salary cap resources, they're going to miss somewhere between 14 and 17 matches. And so, for me, if we can do the business that we want to do in January, that will always be the preference. It is harder in January, obviously in Europe in particular. Those seasons are running, and so it is harder to get the players that you want. And ultimately, we've got to get the players that we want. And if that means we have to wait for 1 or 2 players, then we have to wait. But we know the team is nowhere near ready to compete right now because we need new players. So we're going to have to make a lot of additions come January, February, March to make sure the team is as competitive as we can be from the very first game of next season. I think the World Cup's going to be really interesting. You know, I've not worked here where the World Cup has happened. So I think what we will see, I am very confident, is a whole group of players that experience soccer in this country for maybe the very first time, and will be extremely interested in playing in across the US. And I have no doubt when whoever comes to visit Kansas City and sees the amazing fan base, infrastructure, facilities, we're going to have a lot of interest in our club. I think there is still a reality. We don't really want to be scouting or making decisions off players off 3 group games in a World Cup or something like that. But hopefully we've done the scouting and we've done the work in advance. So if we do still have flexibility in the roster, we can potentially pivot and try to bring some of those players in that will have interest in playing in this country once they've seen the incredible infrastructure and facilities across the US, Canada, and Mexico.
Hey, David. I know you're going to be trying to fill as much of the roster as you can by, I think you said January 10th when players report. But what's the realistic number of how many players you can sign in that short amount of time?
I don't want to put a number on it because otherwise I'm limiting myself. The goal will be to fill as many as you possibly can. Ultimately, I have to be disciplined to make the right decisions. You know, that January 10th is a date that I can promise is circled on my calendar because you want to make sure we are ready to go. However, you know, we have to make the right decisions. When I look at the roster and certainly look at some of the contracts and the salary cap that has been committed here, unfortunately, that is part of the reason why the club hasn't had as much success as we all would have liked in the last few years. We have to be disciplined about the players that we want to bring in, make sure they're coming in at as many of as you can at the right value and the right time. And if that means we need to wait until January 15 to make a decision, I'll have to try and do that. There's a balance. We need a roster to compete, but ultimately, you know, I've got to try and make sure, especially when we're making commitments that might be 2, 3, 4 years, that we're really confident those are the right players to bring into the group for next season. And if that means slightly delayed than we would like, then that's what we'll have to do to make sure we get the right ones in. But we only have 12 players on the contract right now, so there are going to be players that need to be here come the start, and we're focused on that right now.
And then the coaching search, I don't, can you say like anybody has expressed interest or how many may have expressed interest to you already?
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. I think it's a really attractive job. I think people in this country and abroad recognize that this is a really attractive job. I've had an awful lot of phone calls, awful lot of messages from people. Right now, we've said we wanted to get through the game in Houston. I wanted to assess how things worked in the first. We had 8 or 9 days of training. That was all I really had to see on the ground here. I wanted to get through the game in Houston and then the player decisions. And now that process kicks off in earnest immediately and has already started. And so conversations will start happening very, very quickly. And then we'll take that process from there. But again, we're making a decision that for a head coach who's hopefully here for an awfully long time, we want to make sure we do that process really thoroughly and get the right person in.
And then it showed that you were in negotiations with Santi, a guy who was here on loan. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, very early stages. We had a conversation with his agent this morning. He has an option. We had an option which is still available up until December 1. Ultimately, when we analysed that contract, we felt like we'd like to try and renegotiate to make it slightly more favourable to us, maybe reduce the transfer fee. So those conversations are started literally this morning. We have not reached out to his club yet, so it's just been with his agent, with Santi. Santi wants to be here. We would like Santi to stay. So now it's just the trick is trying to find an agreement that makes sense for all parties. I don't know if that's possible or not. You know, ultimately he's under contract at another club, and it is their decision from this point. But we're going to start those conversations to see if it is possible to bring him back, because I think he's a good player and has a role to fit in this team in 26 and beyond. And I really like the fact that he really wants to be here too.
Back here, David, you mentioned analytics and how much of a process that would play. In terms of filling out a staff, the first question is in terms of filling out a staff, how is that process going with the analytical department?
Yeah, so I would say right now we're not posting or looking to hire an analytics department right now. As I mentioned, we have to be so focused on decisions that are going to impact January, February, March. If we distract ourselves too much from departments, even if we were to hire an entire analytics department tomorrow, the likelihood of them impacting the decisions that we make in January is relatively small. And so for us, it's trying to use the resources that we have right now and make sure when we're building an analytics department that is a long-term investment, that we do that in the right way. And so for sure, we've started to have conversations. We are working with some consultant groups that can bring in some data support to us to help us for January. But the actual hiring of that department will probably be something that takes place over the next 12 months or so to really build it to where we want to get to.
And with the 12 players you do have on the roster, and of course others that you're trying to negotiate with, do you feel like you have some building pieces to go around, or do you feel that maybe in the construct of a roster that you might have to bring in some pieces that the guys available now will have to build around?
I think a little bit of both. I think the players that I'm incredibly excited by. I think we've got two excellent DPs that have shown that they can have an impact in the league. I think John had an excellent season in goal despite the number of chances that we gave up. I think he had a good season. Jacob Bartlett, Jake Davis, both two really, really talented young players. We've got Daniel and Shappy, two wingers that I think Daniel's shown he can have a big impact. I think Shappy had a good season, and I think we can see more out of him. So I think we have building blocks in the team, but it would be no surprise to say that we're also going to need to bring in some players that we also see being here for the next 3, 4, 5 years and getting the core of the group more developed than it is right now. So there'll be a lot of competition for places next year. That's the goal, and that's going to require us bringing in some players that we believe are going to be some of our better players to help complement the group that we did decide to keep.
Going to the head coaching hire, I mean, in New York, you were able to bring in some coaches that came from outside of MLS that were able to come in and have success. Where do you value the in MLS experience success that coaching candidates may have had versus, being able to hire guys that have been outside MLS? I mean, even looking at Vancouver with who they hired this offseason. His name's escaping me for the moment. But yeah, but I mean, it's a coach of the year candidate. How do you look and balance and see what matters maybe in bringing a coach that's outside of an MLS to work in MLS?
I think MLS experience is helpful, but it's not going to be a determinant between one candidate or another because I think we have shown, and I think across the league has shown, that you can identify coaches that maybe do not have MLS experience. I think it's critical there is MLS experience around a head coach, whether that's on the staff, whether that's myself and the support staff, so they can understand how a roster is constructed. But ultimately, I want to find the best coach who's the best to work with the players on the pitch every single day that can drive their development and drive performance. And we will look domestically, we will look internationally. That will be a global search to try and find the right head coach. And it's not having prior MLS experience is probably not going to sway one decision or another.
And again, I know the first team is always the priority for everything, but the two team is also does not have a head coach right now, unless one's been hired, and has a pool of players that will need to make decisions on and bring in players so that you can support the first team. How do you work that priority in with everything else you're doing right now? I know you have a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. So those decisions, thankfully, are slightly later. So I've still got a little bit more time before we have to make those decisions. SKC2 is a critical part of our pro player pathway, and so we need to get that right. We will be looking for a new head coach and looking to bring in a head coach into that team. We have not started that process yet, as we've been solely focused on the first team. At some point, I will need to divert some attention away from first team to make sure that the second team is as set up as it possibly can. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the academy games on the weekend before the Houston match, so I got to see both the 15s and the 18s play. Couldn't see the 16s because it was the same time, but get to start to see some of the players that are in our development pipeline, which is really exciting. So there's a lot to do. First team will take focus. That is the reality. We have to make sure this team is as competitive as we can be come the beginning part of next season. But we've got to also make sure that the pro player pathway in SKC2 is as developed as it can be as well.
And then the coaching staff with the first team, there's still some coaches here. How do you make that decision, or do you wait till the new coach comes in for that hire? To make those decisions?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So every individual is maybe in a slightly different contractual position. So you try and take those decisions one by one. ultimately, I would certainly, my preference would be for a head coach to be hired so they can make the decision. They're the people that they're going to be working with every single day. But if that's not the timeline that we're able to achieve, then so be it. Then we have to make those decisions. But ideally, we'd have a head coach in place so they can help to make some of those decisions on staff that might be in their staff and out of contract.
One last one, just maybe how would you evaluate the way Kerry has coached his team in the interim? And I know maybe from afar, but also in your moments working with him, what have the conversations been like about his interest in that head coaching role full time?
Yeah, I think it was a difficult job. Kerry stepped into difficult circumstances after Peter's departure. The results, we finished 15th in the league. That's when nobody wants to be. But I think Kerry managed himself and managed the group as well as he could. I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know Kerry over the last couple of weeks. Spent a lot of time with him. We'll spend more time in the coming days and weeks as well. He has expressed interest in the role to become head coach permanently, and he will absolutely be a candidate for us because he's got a huge tenure here, and I think has a huge amount of experience that could be really valuable for us. As I mentioned in my opening press conference, we're also going to do a global search, and Kerry knows that too. But I'm excited to spend more time with Kerry now the season is done, and you're not dealing with the stress and the pressure of trying to prepare the team every day. We're going to get to spend more time together. But Kerry's opinion on the roster and the input on decisions has been super valuable to me personally, and somebody I've really enjoyed getting to know. He's clearly a top class person, and that's a really good place to start.
And David, you all announced today that you're renegotiating with Ryan Shayway. It was a very, very young goalkeeper room this year. Do you envision there being a veteran to compete with John for those starting minutes next year?
So I think the plan will be to have 4 goalkeepers under contract. We had 3 this year. My preference is to have 4 goalkeepers under contract. I couldn't say for sure whether that will be competing with John for number 1 minutes, competing to be a number 2 or a number 3 or number 4. I don't know that yet. I would also agree that the goalkeeping group was young. And so if we can find the right goalkeeper to come in to add a little bit more experience into that group, I do believe that will benefit the group as a whole. However, I do want to reiterate, I think John had a really, really good season, a really strong season this year. But ultimately, if we can bring a more experienced goalkeeper into the group to complement the 3 that are here, assuming Ryan chooses to return, then that would be something that I think would add to our group for next year.
Kerry, as you look back kind of at this year, I don't know how much time you've had to reflect since Saturday on what's transpired, but I mean, what do you look at when you evaluate this season for yourself and for this team?
Well, I think it's clear it was a challenging year. A lot transpired early on that shifted the narrative in a completely different direction that none of us were expecting. And so to take that on, March going into April, and now try to right the ship and point the team and the club in a direction that would generate some sort of momentum to capture the rest of the season. I think we did that in the first phase. Up through June and into July, I think the ship had steadied a little bit. And so it was a tough stretch in July. I think it was a 5-game period where San Diego, Seattle twice, Orlando away, came up against some very good teams, and we weren't able to recover that. So, as I said, it was a challenging year. There were some positives with that. Of course, we got to see a lot of the young emerging talent in Bartlett, James, Miller, some great displays from Pools Camp. And so there is promise for the future and into next year with the young players. That was definitely a positive. There were moments where we showed great resilience coming back in games. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was a group that was flawed in too many areas to overcome. And so that we ended up where we were based on that.
If you could kind of give us a little bit of insight too about what it was like in the background. I know people may not see a thin backroom staff. They may not see some of the day-to-day operations being as kind of difficult as they were at times. I mean, what can you maybe shed light on? Just maybe the difficulties and struggles that you guys have had over the year and things that you've had to deal with.
Yeah, it was It was significant, but before I would even look to address that, I look at the things that we could have done better, myself included. And so with that, there were some facts, right? We had a short staff. We had, you know, a group of players that were going to be coming out of contract, and we saw that towards the end of the season that it really impacted the approach that they took on a daily basis. And so that was difficult to navigate. We had staff members that were leaving the club, a lot of transition that was going on, both on the field and off the field. And with that sort of instability that you have within a club, it's really, really difficult to get results. So at the end of the day, my job was to help navigate the group through that. And that was an awesome responsibility that I learned personally a lot from. And so I think, yeah, it was upon reflection, a great opportunity, a massive challenge, but also leaves hope for the future.
Hey, Kerry. Yeah, it's been a difficult year, but I know there's a lot of growth in a lot of different ways. What do you think has been the biggest growth for you this year?
Well, I think it was for sure understanding the importance of people and relying on them, you know, creating a group that can count on each other. That was number one for me. Navigating through a very difficult moment and ending up on the opposite end of that, still standing up, knowing that I can lead a group through difficult times. That was important for me to understand and to see, but also knowing that I can do this job and coach the game and coach a group and lead a group out onto the field. And so the results weren't where I wanted them to be, nor I believe anyone else expected or wanted them to be, but there were a lot of positives behind the scenes that certainly paints a foundation for a promising future.
When it comes to the future, Kerry, as you know, I've been digging through the history of the club quite a bit, and you're there through the Wizards' time when the team was winning a double, through the rebrand, through the 13 through 17 teams that won a lot of trophies. So you have a really good perspective on where the club has been, the different changes. What do you think is important for the club to hold on to or to focus on in terms of, I don't know if it's identity or just maybe the lessons you've learned through all the different iterations of this club, now that it's going to take another step? What are some of the most important things for this club in this market?
I think first and foremost to appreciate our history. You have to look back and reflect on what this club has accomplished. And as you said, I have a different perspective or a unique perspective going back all the way to 2000 and the early successes that we had and the possibility that we were going to be relocated. And so the instability that occurred in those early years and all the way through 2006 until the new ownership group took over, a lot of instability, not a lot of recognition within the city. Certainly the team wasn't fully immersed the way it is now in the sports landscape. And so to see that evolve, to see that come through and, rebrand ourselves, to build a new stadium, all of those things we have to be proud of and reflect on. You know, I mentioned the stadium at one point still being the gold standard of stadiums in the league. We've done a lot of things in a great way, both on the field and off the field. But moving forward, I think it's incredibly important that we realign ourselves with our identity of who we were, try to come back to that, but in a more modern way and evolve the idea. And to be more specific with that, we had a very defined style of play over the years. Some say it was a little bit too automated, too robotic, but it was certainly a clear identity. And so Major League Soccer has evolved. We need to evolve both on the field and off the field. And so I think it's very important that we align first our identity. Who are we? What do we want to be? Clarify ourselves in our philosophy of how we see the game, how we want to play the game. The kind of player profiles that we bring in to execute that kind of play. To hire a head coach that comes in and understands that that idea of how it's very much a holistic idea when you include that along with the academy, along with how you transfer players, how you bring players in. All of that is completely integrated, and that's the modern club. That's what's required to be successful in Major League Soccer. And fortunately, I believe we're headed in that direction.
You referenced how, in 2000, you guys won so much, but it didn't really seem to connect because it just didn't have the footprint or the foothold in the market. 2013, that era was a very different landscape. You were the hot thing in town, right, with the new stadium. Nobody else was really winning, which I think helped. Now you're in a different landscape where you got the Chiefs winning, and you've got even another professional soccer team in town, but you also have a World Cup coming. I'm kind of curious what you think when you look to the future, some of the opportunities, but also challenges of keeping that fan base and that sense of presence in the market that you live in now here in Kansas City.
Well, we have great supporters. I know during difficult moments, and there certainly was a storm this year, that not just our team, but any team in this community, which has a very proud sports history, there will be ebbs and flows to that. And so while we were winning in 2013, I think we kicked off an era in which the Royals won soon after that. And then soon after that, the Chiefs started winning Super Bowls, and now the Current are coming into play and hopefully going to win a championship this year. So it is very cyclical, and when you're winning in this city, it's a tremendous feeling, a sense of pride of representing this great city. And so we have that opportunity again. When we talk about 2013, it's not like, from 2000 all the way up until 13 that everything was great. We had our moments in 06, 07, 08 where we were struggling, and as I mentioned earlier, we were on the cusp of being relocated, an afterthought in the city. And so we know what tough times are like, and we know what it's like to come back from that. And so we built a cycle of players through 11, 12 into 13 that made the city proud. And I feel like we're in that moment again where we have to reflect. We have to lick our wounds. But moving forward, we have this opportunity again to make this city proud.
And Kerry, you talked about staff already moving on. We heard today Alec Duffy is going to Huntsville. You spent nearly a decade with him coaching. Can you kind of talk about what he meant to the team?
Yeah, Alec was fully embodied the core values that we hold dear to the club. Certainly a team-first guy, had a tremendous work ethic, and wanted to win. He had a winning mentality, and he went about his business and developing goalkeepers with an approach to try to make this club better. And when you have people like that, it's difficult to see them go. But certainly you want ambitious people that want to go on and do other things in their careers and advance in their lives. And we're happy for him that he's left, but we're certainly going to miss him.
And then David just talked to us, and he was talking about how yourself and Mike and him were mostly aligned on the significant number of roster moves that were made today. It's a pretty heavy turnover. Can you kind of talk about how tough it is to move on from so many players in one single day?
Well, I think you always hold dear to your heart the people that you've been in battle with, and certainly the season that we went through, it's going to leave a mark for all of us. But we were bonded by that experience, as difficult as it was. But I will say that when you win championships and you're around a group of people that want to win championships and are up there competing for it, you tend to look on that a little bit more fondly. And so we say goodbye to a group of players that have given great service to this club, but we're excited for the next group to come in that has the hunger, the passion, the determination to bring this club back to where it belongs.
Kerry, I know last week I asked you if you were interested in the job full-time. I was just curious if for some reason that didn't materialize, is there still an interest for you to stick around the club in a capacity if it were offered that wouldn't be the full-time head coaching role, or is that something that you would maybe look to go do something else? What do you look at for yourself kind of in the future of your career after this season?
It's a difficult question to answer. What I will say, and talking with Nate just a little while ago, to have that appreciation for the history of this club, and to understand what we've been through and what this city has meant to this club and vice versa. It's a difficult project to leave. But I retired a couple of years earlier than what I potentially could have or should have. And I certainly don't want to overstay my welcome to the club. I always want to be someone that's contributing in a positive way because it's in the best interests of the club, certainly from my perspective, that we go on to do great things. And if I'm a part of that, excellent. If not, I know the club's going to be successful in the years to come.